Okay. Hi, Amy. Okay, let me tell a little bit about us. My English Club, it's a non-profit community of practice dedicated to English language teachers or future teachers from all backgrounds worldwide, providing discussion forums and, of course, workshops. And also, I would like to mention about Bangun Tunas Cerdas Indonesia Foundation. And it is a legal umbrella institution for my English club, and it focuses on education and sustainable development goals in general. Okay, so here is what is going to happen in our mini PD workshop. So it is a low commitment, only 90 to 120 minutes. Okay, 1 hour and a half, yet insightful mini workshop. Okay, we're going to talk a lot, discuss, and also share perspective. And the trainers are academics and practitioners in applied linguistic, English language teaching or ELT, and quality education. It is aimed at enlarging the teacher's perspective on the current and relevant issues in ELT and enhancing the teaching skills. Held once a month and is open to every teacher around the globe. So here are the academic and also practitioners that are involved in this mini workshop. Okay, as your facilitators today, me and also Leviana will be joining you guys uh, after the discussion with Rich. Okay, there will be breakout room and we will pay you a visit and perhaps we have more discussion in there. And allow me to take a moment to introduce our trainer today, please. So his name is Richard Kamblak, MED Education Leadership and Management with Open University, UK. Old Cambridge DELTA stands for Diploma in Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. He is a Principal Academic Quality Officer in University of Wales Trinity, St. David, UK, and former guidance counselor at University of Wales Trinity, St. David, UK. He also taught English with the British Council and in university level. Okay, so here is the rundown to our event today. There will be an opening introduction, which is now happening. Okay, the introduction stage. And later on, we'll have interactive presentation. It's about 50 minutes, and there will be Q&A at about 20 minutes. Okay, and there is also a hand-on activity, which is divided into breakout room discussion for about 30 minutes in total. Okay, here's next we have a sharing section, and the last one is closing. So buckle up. We're going to have a nice adventure in this activity. And please remain in mute mode during the presentation to make it more comfortable, okay, as we can focus on the material. And please turn on your video whenever possible, okay? And you are welcome to be a discussant or a listener during a hands-on session. Like, it's not really mandatory if you want to vocal your opinion or perspective. If you prefer to be a listener, you are welcome to. And of course, have an exciting and productive discussion. Okay, so without further ado, I'll give Richard the stage.
Thank you very much, Arga. Thank you. Can everybody?
Stage is yours.
Thank you. Can everybody see the screen okay? Great. And if I scroll through the slides, can we see the slides changing? We can. Good. The reason I ask is because I so often have disasters with Zoom and with Teams. that I think it's a good idea to ask first, in particular because my other device constantly fails on Zoom. I'm using my work device today, hoping it will succeed. So thank you very much, Arga, for that introduction. And thank you to everybody for coming. I'm really looking forward to our discussion later on. And it's great also to see familiar faces in the audience today. So thank you so much for coming and for making the effort. Today, I wanted to step back from classroom practice and ask this question: what's the point of education? I guess we all think there is a point because we're all here. Most of us teach, most of us work in education in some form. I guess we think there is a point, but what is the point of education? We're going to look at a range of educational philosophies that explore the point of education. Now, you'll remember in a previous session, we looked at radical pedagogy, those radical ideas that challenge what we normally do with education. And we looked at cultural literacy, the other side of that argument. So we're going to look at that again. We're also going to look at two other important educational philosophies, the Montessori school and the Steiner school. You may have heard of Montessori and Steiner before. More likely you've heard of Montessori. Slightly less likely you've heard of Steiner, but you may have heard of both. And I'm also going to ask you to think about why you teach what you teach and think about what your own educational philosophy is. Because one of the nice things with philosophy is that actually there are no right or wrong answers. Your philosophy is guided by your values, by what you think is important. So when it comes to your teaching practice, you have a lot of freedom to think and reflect for yourself. What do I think is important here? And that's what I want to start looking at today. This is 16-year-old me. When I was 16, I had a very different educational philosophy from my educational philosophy today. 16-year-old me, you can probably see, didn't like school very much and was quite happy to leave school at the first opportunity. And I actually left school pretty much immediately. But 16-year-old me did actually have quite a strong educational philosophy. 16-year-old me was definitely a fan of radical pedagogy, definitely believed in challenging the power structures. 16-year-old me also loved learning. One of the reasons why I wanted to present 16-year-old me here is because when we think about education, we normally think in terms of the good, well-behaved children and what is in their interests. But I think it's really important that every philosophy considers every child, good and bad, and every adult, wherever they are in their learning journey. That's why I wanted to introduce this slightly rebellious character here, because it's always worth having in mind the slightly difficult students. Where do they fit into your philosophy? Just a question to start you off there. And here's another question to start you off. Does the philosophy of education even matter? So here are two of my friends. These are not their real pictures, by the way. These are stock photos. But Simon and Yemi are real. Simon and Yemi are real friends of mine who are teachers. They have two very different views on whether the philosophy of education is important. Let's take a look at their views. Simon says, I don't have time to think about why I'm teaching. I do the job that I'm paid to do, and I teach what I'm told to teach. What matters is that you can get the information into the learners' heads in the most efficient way possible. So Simon has no time for educational philosophy. Simon is a qualified teacher, by the way, a very good teacher. But Simon has no interest in the philosophy of education, thinks this is a waste of time. The government tells you what to teach. You just teach that. Okay. Here's Yemi. This is what Yemi thinks. Yemi says, you can't be a good teacher if you haven't reflected on why you're doing the job. If teaching is just a practical job and there are no values involved, you might as well replace teachers with robots. So for Yemi, the philosophy of education is very important. You must have a reason why you're doing this. Your values as a teacher are everything. Yemi says you might as well replace teachers with robots. Simon would probably say, go ahead then. If they do a better job, if your learners could learn better with robots rather than teachers, why stop them? That's what Simon would say. Does the philosophy of education even matter then? I think yes, it does, because I think teaching is fundamentally a human job. And I think education, teaching aside, education is about humans, I would argue. But maybe not everyone would agree with me. Maybe you can learn a lot without any values, without any human input. There's a question for you to think about. Are you more a Simon or are you more a Yemi in this situation? Whose views do you feel better represent your views? A question to think about. Here are two people, though, who very much believe in education and who have very strong philosophy of education. Nelson Mandela and Malala Yousafzai. I imagine you've heard of both of these people. Nelson Mandela, who liberated South Africa as the first democratically elected Black president, and Malala Yousafzai, an education campaigner from Afghanistan, can't remember if she's from Pakistan or Afghanistan originally, Pakistan, I believe, who survived an assassination attempt from the Taliban in pursuit of an education. They both feel very strongly about the philosophy of education. They both believe education is powerful. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world, says Mandela. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world, says Malala. Quite inspiring views on the philosophy of education from Mandela and from Malala. Are they right, though? Are they actually correct? Can education really change the world? They believe so very strongly. Do they have any evidence? How do they know education can change the world? We say this all the time. What do we mean by that? And another question for you, should education actually change the world? Is education always a good thing? Imagine the situation of, say, a child at a school you're working at who's being bullied, who's really unhappy, who has a very difficult family life. They just want to be home with their family, helping out their family. They don't want to be coming to school, doing badly, being told that they're failing and being bullied. Is education a good thing for them? They would probably say no. Do they have the right to say no? Should they have the right to say no? Is education always a good thing? I think we should ask that question, because if we work in education, we want to be sure that what we're providing is a good thing for our learners, don't we? So if they feel strongly that it isn't, I think it's important that we can explain why it is. Martin Luther King, the campaigner for civil rights in America, said the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. I think most of us agree, but I think most of us might not realize he's being quite critical of what schools do when he says this. So if you were a teacher to young Mandela or Malala, would you be educating them to change the world? Or would you be educating them to fit into the world? That's quite a tricky question. And that brings us back to what we talked about last time with radical pedagogy. Last time that I presented earlier this year, I introduced you to the philosophy of radical pedagogy. Radical pedagogy from Paulo Freire, from the literacy activist Paulo Freire. He argued that learners should aim to change their reality. Education should be all about changing the world. It's not about accepting the world. We should be aiming to change it. We're training our learners to radically change the power structures of society. And for that reason, critical thinking is much more important than facts. Because facts, who decides which facts to learn? The powerful decide. So if you want to change society, you have to think critically and think beyond learning facts. And this is better for social progress. That was the underpinning of the radical pedagogy that we looked at before. That's one philosophy. Let's take a look at the opposite philosophy from Hirsch, which is cultural literacy. Cultural literacy, the philosophy of cultural literacy, is very influential in England in particular. Not in Wales, where I live, but in England, it's a very influential philosophy, and in many countries. The cultural literacy argument is this. So radical pedagogy says learners should aim to change their reality. Cultural literacy says, hey, look, you cannot change the world. The world is unfair. The world is unequal. We have to prepare our learners for the real world. We have to accept the world as it is. If you spend your time teaching your learners that they should go and fight the power and they should challenge conventional thinking, that's wonderful. In 10 years' time, they will be unemployed because they will have no useful skills. They won't know anything. And the powerful will continue to be powerful. So the cultural literacy side says, no, don't try and change the world. Accept it as it is, but prepare your learners for the best. Prepare your learners for this world. Yes, the world is unfair, but the best thing you can do for your learners is give them the facts that powerful people value. So you might think Shakespeare is a waste of time. You might think mathematics is a waste of time. You might think that chemistry is a waste of time. It doesn't matter what you think. The powerful think they're important, so go and learn them. And then you'll have a better chance of success. And the cultural literacy view argues that this is actually better for social harmony because it means that we're all on the same page. If we all agree on what is important, if we all agree that there are certain things every young person should learn, this is our shared culture, then we can be sure everybody is literate in this culture. It means we can make sure every young person has the chance to understand their own culture. So can you see this is the opposite of the radical pedagogy view? The radical pedagogy view, we should change the world, we should fight the power. Cultural literacy, actually, we should accept that power is what it is. And instead, we should prepare our learners for the best possible chance in the world that exists. Goodness, which one of these two is closer to your point of view? Because I'll be honest, I change my mind on this every day. I have a little bit of both in me. Here's another part of the cultural literacy argument. So culture is to know the best which has been thought and said. It's a nice quote. When we talk about understanding our own culture, that means we have to make judgments. What is the best from our culture, and then we focus on teaching that. In the context of English language, for example, the best culture in English language, most people would think Shakespeare, maybe. But think about it, who decides that Shakespeare is the best? You know, some people think Shakespeare's the best. What if I think that Singaporean Singlish rap music is the best culture there is? Is my opinion not important? An important question, who decides what's the best? For example, in many societies, we learn English in school instead of, for example, Dutch. Why? Is that because English is the best language? Or is it just because it happens to be the most useful? It's the one that the powerful prefer. So, an important question around cultural literacy here. Imagine in your cultural context, imagine you didn't teach English. Probably you may say that would be unfair on your learners because the real world, English is important if they want to interact outside of their home society. That's the fact of it. Should you resist that? I don't know. Difficult question. Anyway, this is why these are philosophical questions, because they come down to your values. So we looked at radical pedagogy, fight the power, and we looked at cultural literacy, don't fight the power, accept the world. Both Freire and Hirsch, both radical pedagogy and cultural literacy, are thinking about what's good for society. They're looking at this from the level of what should societies do with education. That's one way of looking at educational philosophy, looking at the level of society. But as teachers, are you always thinking about what's good for society? Or are you actually thinking about what's good for your learners as individuals, the class in front of you? Here's a slightly more difficult question. Is what's good for your learners as individuals the same as what's good for society? If every teacher teaches their individual students really well, this would be good for society, wouldn't it? If every teacher worried about social inequality and didn't care about their learners, that probably wouldn't be good for society either. But a difficult philosophical question. As a teacher, should you be on society's side or should you be on your learner's side? Let me give you an example here. Imagine you work at a school where you teach very rich, very privileged students. All of them will go into top jobs in big companies. They have access to those jobs, and it's not fair because other kids don't have this. But these are the pupils you are teaching. I think you still have an obligation to teach them well. Society is unfair, but that's not your fault. Your job is to teach the pupils in front of you. Should you be worried about social inequality while you're teaching them? That's a problem for politicians to worry about, not for you. You're just the teacher. Or maybe you think, no, it is important that I give my learners moral education. It's important as a teacher, I help my learners understand that they are very privileged and that I help them to understand their role in society. This is the difficult question. As a teacher, should you be on society's side or on your learner's side? Slightly difficult question there, maybe. Let's look at two educational philosophies that focus on the learner, not interested in society. They're focused just on the learner. So one of these is the Montessori approach. You've probably heard of the Montessori approach. You probably have Montessori schools near you. We have a few in the UK, not many. I think Indonesia has a few, and they're quite common. So Montessori is quite a child-centered education. it focuses on self-directed activities. It's all about making those learners quite independent. It's quite self-reliant. You tend to have classrooms with different age groups together. There's lots of peer learning, learners teaching other learners. So maybe looking to slightly older learners who've done this before. There's a big emphasis on practical skills, on hands-on learning. And the teachers tend to stand back, their guides. They let the learners develop in their own way. So this is an approach. This philosophy is all about developing individuals who are self-directed, who rely on themselves. This is not thinking about society and inequality. This is thinking about developing learners who are individuals and who are self-reliant. An interesting philosophy, and one that's been very successful around the world, but with some criticism too. Let's take a look at another approach that's also focused on individual learners, and this is the Steiner approach. You may have heard of the Steiner approach, of the Waldorf-Steiner approach. I should say the traditional Steiner approach has been criticized because the underlying philosophy, anthroposophy, has been accused of being racist and of being rooted in pseudoscience. I would also add that most Steiner teachers accept that criticism and are not actively racist or pseudoscientists. So before any Steiner teachers sue me, I just want to be clear. Most Steiner teachers are clear that they don't accept the racist underpinnings of some aspects of anthroposophy. But it would be wrong for me not to mention that criticism as well, because that criticism is a valid criticism of the original philosophy. Anyway, the complex anthroposophy philosophy aside, here's what Steiner looks like in the classroom. So it's a very holistic education. It's all about the child's head, heart, and hands. That sounds nice, doesn't it? There's lots of imagination in there. Art, music, imaginative play. And there's a lot of thinking about where the child is developmentally. So a lot of focus on what is the child ready for in terms of their physical development, in terms of their psychological development. That's the Steiner approach. So those are two different approaches that focus on the individual learner. And they have some things in common, but they're quite different too. So both of them let teachers give pupils freedom. They stand back, they let the pupils discover. Both of them don't believe in a fixed curriculum. Do you remember with cultural literacy, the whole everyone must learn Shakespeare, drama, physics, Latin, because these are important. This is our cultural foundation. Montessori and Steiner both say, actually, it's not about fixing the curriculum. It's about the individual learner and their development. Both of them are quite holistic rather than just academic. It's not just about sitting down and reading and memorizing. It's about skills. It's about developing as a whole person. And interestingly, both are also quite traditional when it comes to technology. Both of them resist too many screens in the classroom, too much computer time. Both of them encourage pupils to think more about using their hands. But they're very, very different in other ways. So Montessori has a much greater focus on practical skills. Steiner is much more creative, much more about art and music. Let me ask you this question then. Should education be about developing practical skills or being creative? Which is more important? Which is more important for your pupils? Is it more important to prepare them with practical skills for the real world or to be creative? Montessori is much more built around real life skills. Steiner, much more built around imagination. And again, let me ask you the question. Do you remember radical pedagogy versus cultural literacy? We asked the question, is education about changing the world or about accepting the world as it is? Montessori is much more about real life skills, much more about the world as it is. Steiner, much more about imagination, much more about imagining how the world could be different. So we're back to that question, aren't we? That question of, is education about changing the world, or is it about accepting it as it is and preparing our learners for it? Montessori also has, by the way, a lot more time indoors. Montessori classrooms tend to have things like a simulated kitchen environment or a simulated workshop environment. So there's lots of time indoors. Steiner tends to be much more outdoors, much more out in the forest, picking up plants, looking at them, talking about traditional remedies and that kind of thing, much more outdoor based. So take a look at the Montessori approach and the Steiner approach. Do you think either of these is closer to your educational philosophy? Does either of these really correspond to how you feel? One thing for me personally, on the radical pedagogy versus cultural literacy divide, I lean a little towards radical pedagogy. I believe education should change the world. We should fight the power. But on this, actually, I think practical skills are more important than creativity. So actually, maybe I'm a little bit more traditional than I thought I was. So I'm interested to know, Montessori, Steiner, is either of these closer to your philosophy? Maybe. I don't know. So we've looked at 4 different philosophies. We looked at cultural literacy, radical pedagogy, we looked at Montessori, and we looked at Steiner. And here's how we might understand how they're different and how they're similar. So cultural literacy and radical pedagogy, these are both focused on society. These are philosophies that think about education within society, about that central question. Is education about changing society or about accepting and reinforcing society? Montessori and Steiner are focused on the individual learner much more. They're much more interested, not in social inequality or problems of that kind. They're much more interested in developing your learner. What is the best way to develop the pupil in front of you? But look at this interesting kind of cross-section. Cultural literacy and Montessori, they have in common an interest in the world as it is. By their nature, they're more practical philosophies. By contrast, radical pedagogy and Steiner are much more idealistic philosophies. These are philosophies that are much more about imagining a different world. So there's 2 different axes that you can think about education philosophy on here. Do you feel education should be more about society, or is it more about the individual learner? Which is more important to you as someone who works in education? And is it more important to you to be practical, or is it more important to be idealistic? Is it about the world as it is, or is it about imagining a different world? So 2 different axes for reflecting on educational philosophy. Personally, I can see good points and bad points in all 4 of these. And I think maybe different societies need a different approach at different times, and different classes need a different approach at different times. So which is my philosophy? I'd struggle to say. It's somewhere in between them. That's because philosophy is personal to you. Your educational philosophy is very personal to you. You probably are not 100% one of these. You may have a different philosophy altogether. There are other philosophies I haven't talked about, things like behaviorism, for example, or the Piaget model, for example, I've not talked about. But there are 4 different philosophies. Later in this workshop, you're going to be reflecting on your own educational philosophy. But before you do, I want you to think about the future as well. Think about the rise of artificial intelligence, globalization, climate change, future pandemics. Think about your educational philosophy. Is your philosophy ready to embrace how the world is changing? For example, you may feel very strongly that education should be all about going out and discovering nature, being creative. Okay, but artificial intelligence is about to become a big thing. Will your learners be ready for that world with those creative skills? You may think it's important, for example, you may be on the cultural literacy side. All learners should learn traditional subjects, traditional science, mathematics. Great, okay. Does that prepare them for the world of the future? So when you're reflecting on your philosophy, give thought to the future, how the world will change. Is this actually preparing your learners to navigate those changes? And by the way, this is true whether you think education is about changing the world or whether you think education is about embracing the world, doesn't matter. The world is changing. So it's also about preparing your learners for those changes, to navigate those changes, regardless of whether you think that's about accepting them or about challenging them. So those philosophies, again, just to remind you, we've got cultural literacy and radical pedagogy, more focused on society, and Montessori and Steiner, more focused on the individual learner. Remember, cultural literacy, Montessori, this is much more a practical philosophy. It's about the world as it is. Radical pedagogy, Steiner, is much more idealistic, about imagining a different world. And remember, these are not just about curriculum or about your methods. These are about values. When we say values, this is about what's important to you. When you think about education, what is important to you as someone who works in it? Sometimes you may work for a school or an institution that has very clear values. For one example, the university I work for has very clear values around things like sustainability, around the bilingualism of Wales, around equality, diversity, and inclusion. These values are very deep in the university where I work. But you may work in a different context where those values are not clear. And then it actually might be important to you to be able to say, actually, what are the values? Why do we do this? Well, we do this because, and to be able to articulate this. That's one of the reasons it's useful to have this exercise. Also, you might one day, and this has happened to me before, I won't say where, Levy, you might find yourself working for an educational institution whose values are very different from yours. Where, for example, their view of what learning should be, of what should happen in the classroom, is so different from how you understand the classroom that actually it becomes quite uncomfortable to work there. And having a good understanding of your values can help you to navigate that, can help you to think, why is this making me uncomfortable? And then to think, okay, well, either I can accept this or I can try to challenge it, or you can start to think how to play that situation. To give one example, I've worked in one educational context where there was a big emphasis on learners sitting still and being quiet and just working silently through problems, which I felt was not the way to teach learners of that age group. And for me, this wasn't just a question of methods. This was also a question of my values. I felt strongly that actually teenagers should be allowed to have opinions and should be encouraged to develop their opinions. And I felt that very strongly. And I realized like I would struggle to work in this environment for too long. So philosophy, this is the reason we talk about it, because it's about those values that underpin what you do. So we're going to be talking later in the session about what is your educational philosophy. And there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's about what you feel. And maybe being able to explain why you feel that. Where does that feeling come from? So if I asked you, the purpose of education is, many of my friends would say the purpose of education is to build a better and more equal society. But some of my other friends would say, come on, it's not teachers' job to build a more equal society. The purpose of education is to make sure your learners know what they need to know. Schools should, how would you answer that question? Schools should, complete the sentence, what should schools do? Teachers should, what should teachers do? complete these sentences, and you're describing your educational philosophy. What should schools do? What should teachers do? What should learners do? What should society do in relation to education? This is to help you understand and uncover what your values are when it comes to education. And the next step, and a more difficult one, how does your philosophy shape how you teach? So because I believe that X or Y, therefore in the classroom, I X or Y. And I'll give you an example here. Because I believe that education should encourage our learners to challenge power, therefore, in the classroom, I encourage learners to express their opinions, even if those opinions are controversial. However, because I believe that every young person, regardless of their background, should feel safe in the classroom, therefore, in the classroom, if I hear any sexist language, racist language, language that picks on someone for a disability, I crack down on it very quickly. My feelings on EDI are very strong, for example. These are examples of how your philosophy informs what you do in the classroom. Another thing, by the way, because I believe that there is too much power in the hands of teachers and in the hands of schools, therefore, in the classroom, I try not to use disciplinary measures to control behavior. Instead, I try to model good behavior. Sometimes you don't have a choice, I accept. But because I believe quite strongly that actually power dynamics in schools are not always good, therefore, I try to do things a different way. So sometimes understanding your philosophy can shape how you act in the classroom. And I want you to think about this too. How do your beliefs inform what you do in the classroom? Thank you very much for joining the session. I hope you found that useful, and I hope that that wasn't too technical or too jargony from a philosophy perspective, that it was accessible and easy enough to follow. But thank you. Any questions I'm happy to take. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for the material, Rich. I think I just had a circumstantial crisis thinking about the philosophy in education.
Sorry.
You had me there. I mean, I was like, wait, yeah, that was true. This is some kind of a dilemma that we are put in such situation, especially education. And I'm sure that not only me who experienced that kind of turbulence during the material. And okay, I guess it's time for us to open a question and answer. So anyone would like to voice their question? One? Okay. Levi, please.
Okay, thank you, Arga. Thank you so much,
Yep.
Rich, for the brilliant presentation as always. Um, yeah, as Arga mentions, there are some turbulence is happening now in my heart and in my mind. So yeah, but it's good though. It's good. I think there is always times for us to stop, to pause from our teaching activity and start to think why we are doing this and what are we gonna do with all of the knowledge and the philosophy that we have. Okay, so my questions is actually rooted in what you just said when you say that you yourself had some conflicting philosophies in your mind. Sometimes you might be more into Steiner, but at the other time you will be more into Montessori and so on. And I believe that it is something that also happens to many teachers as well. In my field, for example, it's really common for teachers to have a conflicting view, for example, whether they want to teach based on native speaker English or whether they want to be more open-minded to the varieties of English in the world, which is actually the reality of the world these days. Now, my questions is, which is also not just to you, but to everyone basically. How do you guys settle this? How do you settle this conflicting philosophy and views in your head? In my case, I probably would see the stakeholders where I teach. I might look at my learners, their need. I might look at the parents. I might look at the society where I teach. But I would like to know, what about you, Rich, and what about the rest of us here in this forum, if you could answer that as well on the chat. I don't know. Thank you, Olga and Rich.
Thank you for that question. That's a really good question. Actually, I'll give an example of a time when I didn't successfully resolve those issues in my head. When I was teaching in a university in Japan, Japan has a very formulaic model of education, very much based on cultural literacy. It's very much based on the cultural literacy philosophy. More or less everyone has basically the same kind of education and learns the same core curriculum, which is quite traditional in nature. So I remember I was teaching students to pass our end of semester module exam. The exam was totally not communicative. The exam was random grammar points that somebody decided were important. It was very pedantic, very, not at all linked to communicative outcomes. So some random grammar points that everyone had to learn and apply perfectly. This was a group where the level of spoken English was quite low, where the group wanted to do more speaking, but I couldn't do more speaking with them because I had to get them through this exam. Because if I didn't get them through this exam, they would not be able to progress to year 2 of their degree. I remember having a full existential crisis in the classroom once during the middle of an incredibly boring activity where, while they were doing the activity in silence, I was writing on my notepad to myself, is all education a confidence trick? Is this basically a pyramid scheme? Are we all just trained as teachers in order to occupy jobs, do you know what I mean? I just had a complete breakdown in terms of my values. I could not resolve my values against what the university was asking me to do. So that's an example of me not succeeding in resolving my values. But Levi, I think you're absolutely correct. I think you have to, when you take any education-related job, who are the stakeholders? What do they need? What are their expectations? And ask yourself, can I live with this? Am I okay with this? Are my values comfortable enough with this? I have quite strong political views, for example, on social inequality. I would struggle to teach in a very exclusive school where all of the students were from very rich backgrounds, because I think, those pupils deserve a good education. I completely accept. And it's important somebody teaches them, and it should be a good teacher who will teach them responsibly and encourage them to think about their privilege. But that person would not be me, because my values would be too uncomfortable with it. And I think sometimes it's about being honest with yourself about your values before you accept the job in the first place. I don't know. This is a difficult one. Some of my friends, I'll be honest, have struggled to work in countries such as Saudi Arabia, for example, because the difference between British cultural values, particularly around gender, are so different from the expectations in Saudi Arabia, for example. Are they being fair about those differences? I don't know. But do you know what I mean? But those differences nevertheless are important to them. And I think sometimes it's important that you just understand yourself well enough to know, can you do what's being asked of you? Can you reconcile the dissonance between your values and the values of that institution and the values underpinning that role? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Eddie? Or
Absolutely, and give me more thought. Thank you.
I would also love to hear other people's experiences of that. I'm actually interested to know, have you ever been asked to teach something where you felt, I'm really uncomfortable teaching this. This is really uncomfortable alongside my values. I'll share actually one example of this on a more basic level. When working in Indonesia in English first, actually, Levy, with a group of teenagers, one of the textbook activities dealt with the topic of child abuse. And the learners were all 13, 14 years old. And I felt really uncomfortable teaching that topic to that age group, particularly in the way that it was presented in the textbook, which I thought was quite insensitive. That's an example of where sometimes your values just immediately, I just thought, I don't like how this is presented. I don't feel comfortable answering the students' questions if it raises questions without more context. So you see what I mean? This can happen in any situation, can't it? You could find yourself in that situation in any setting, I guess.
Okay, so how's that, Livy? Enlightened yet? Okay, that's good. Well, to be honest, I can relate to the circumstances that what Rich told us earlier. Like, the material somehow can be conflicted as well, but the way we want to deliver material. But yeah, that's what we experience. I don't think I use the word sometimes. I can say this most likely often, close to always. Okay, so anyone else would like to ask a question? One. Okay, it's in the chat. Okay, allow me to read it. So it's from Zamzam. Yeah. The question is, what do you think as a teacher? There is a division between private school and state schools. Why isn't AI? Oh, this is two different questions, or I think this is more than one question. Yeah, the first one is related to there is a division between private school and state school, and then the second one, why isn't AI part of the curriculum for 2024 yet in the UK?
Thank you. Thanks for
Okay.
your question, Zamzam. I think in terms of your first main question around private schools and state schools, the UK has a very particular cultural history around private schools and state schools, one that's very different from a number of countries. I think the reasons for that are to do with our particular history of social class. We have some schools, the so-called public schools. Public schools, by the way, for everyone, public school in the UK does not mean what public school means in the US. In the US, public school is what we call state school, government funded, free. In the UK, public school means very exclusive, expensive schools attended by the children of aristocrats. It means the exact opposite. It's a bit 1984 doublethink, isn't it? But there we go. Our public schools go back to a particular history of elite education for the aristocrats, and our private schools are an imitation of that, I guess. Our state schools date back to originally to the 1870s and then to the 1944 Education Act. So they remain very separate. They remain two very, very separate worlds. Something like 7% of pupils attend private schools in the UK, but they represent nearly 50% of people who go to Oxford or Cambridge, and something like 90% of our judges. So they continue to be incredibly influential. Why do we continue to have this social divide? There is a question. Do the private schools create that social divide, or are they a consequence of that social divide? People who work in private schools will say they didn't invent social inequality, they're just reflecting social inequality. But other people would say, no, they're creating it. They're responsible for creating it because these are the institutions where powerful young people learn to be powerful people. This is the point of them. I don't know. I'll declare an interest, by the way. I had a scholarship to a private school for a few years. So I was educated around people from very rich families. And I really didn't fit in there. There's a reason why I left school at 15 and started smoking and being bad. Like I was completely not in the right world for me. No, it's a really interesting and important question. But you're right, Samsung, and it raises a question philosophically. Is it our job as people who work in education to change society? Or should we just accept this is the world as it is and we just do the best job we can for the pupils in front of us? Really difficult question. I have friends who are qualified teachers who would refuse to work in private schools in the UK, for example, because they feel strongly on principle they do not want to be part of reinforcing social inequality. I feel that way a little myself, if I'm honest. In terms of AI, why isn't AI part of the curriculum? Good question. I personally believe it should be. Myself, I think it's overdue. I think maybe AI revolution is moving so fast that nobody really knows how to respond. I don't think many countries have yet incorporated AI successfully into their curricula. Estonia, I think, has tried. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's probably time. It probably is time. I would agree. What do you think, Samson?
Okay, please, you may respond.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's very interesting in terms of how the future of education is working. I think you put a lot of interesting information onto the slides, especially the way individuals are thinking, how countries are working towards their curriculum. So it's very interesting, I must admit. And I think one thing as I've learned so far by living in the UK is that we all have one agenda, is to have one type of a qualification, which gives you a skills for life. And I think, especially as you say, from a university point of view, as an individual, as a teacher, education is expanding to greater lengths. However, I see AI as a slightly a bit danger for the natural human mind, and also for how young people can flourish in terms of language, mathematics, writing, and also learning those basic human skills. Thank you.
Interesting.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we still have one more, right? And please, Nita, you may ask the
Okay.
question.
Yes, this is just want to share about my experience as Montessorian since 2009, and then I really thank you for your presentation about the philosophy. So, in my opinion, about the philosophy is very fundamental. The value that we want to what we want to do for the children, for our future, and also for the school. As a founder for the school, at the beginning, I'm not an educator. I'm an engineer, right? But when I confused with this current situation about the education, what is the purpose of education actually? Because we just memorize and then competition, everything. So it's not really what, in my opinion, that the value of education. So I turned my career from the engineer, become an educator, and then learn about the Montessori. So I learned that, in my opinion, the philosophy for the education is not only just to get the certification. So most of the people like for the certification, right? And then I see that I don't think Montessori is the best. No, this is just my opinion. But in Montessori philosophy, we teach the children to be responsible, to give them like independent to do something, to choose, give them a freedom. But there is still a limit because we have a norm, we have a rules, right? And also we see there is like the pace of development. For example, like 0 to 6, there is like early childhood. 6 to 12, there is like childhood, and also until to 24 years old. So the practical life, like you mentioned at the beginning, is really to build the fundamental for the children to feel, okay, I can do it. So they learn to be confident, they can be responsible for whatever they choose, right? Not by parents choose this or teacher choose this is you have to learn, but we teach them, we guide them. We don't say teach but guide, because teaching is not like to pouring something to the children's brain, but we guide them to shape them to find what the more interesting or what the child need, right? Based on the pace of development. Why we really go to the practical life? Because sometimes we we know that what the hand does, the mind remember. So it likes muscles memory without just what do you call it, memorize everything wording, but they never touch it. So in the early childhood and then what do you call it, childhood level, they learn how to do in the practical life. They continue to build like what do you call it, we don't teach them like math at the beginning, no. We don't teach them with the what do you call it, like a language, but we teach them or we tell them the story about the history of the language, the history of the math, the history of the human and universe. So the children will start to say, oh, I want to learn about this. So we trigger their interest based on the story. So I really like about the what do you call it, the story that we give it to the children, and they start to think, oh yes, why people need like this, why people need. So based on why question, and then they start to do the research, they start to love learning everything, because we don't say like math is the best lesson in the classroom, we don't say English is the highest, no, but all the lessons are integrated up to they go to the secondary level, and then they start to think about what I should suit or fit to the community. So they learn how to do something for the community, like community service. They can do everything. They think, oh, I want to continue to the university with the major like this. Okay, so you have to prepare yourself. So in my opinion, when I start this Montessori school, it is like small school. Miss Levy really know about my school because I start for my son. We build the philosophy, the value. Do we have the same value with teachers and parents? Because if we don't have the same value, and then it looks like our mission and vision is not same. So better we stop. But if we think the philosophy is same, okay, now we can go together, because we believe there are three factors in the education. We need children, and then we need adult like parents and also teachers, and also the environment. How we see the balance of the three factors by the observation, because we have to observe, oh, the one children like, for example, math. Oh, one children like to do like woodworking. Or one children like, and then we have to customize, because the curriculum is not fixed curriculum, like you said before. The curriculum is the child. But this is like difficult for the teachers, right? Because most of the teachers from the different background, they just think about, okay, I have the module, I have to teach like this, like this. But in Montessori, no, we have to do the observation. We have to see what is the nature need, what is the family norm, what is the, what do you call it, the nation and everything. So it looks like we based on the culture, and then we can fit with different culture in this world. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I would actually be really interested, Nita, to hear you doing a presentation on Montessori and on the whole philosophy one day, actually, because it sounds like you really mastered it. But what you're talking about is exactly what I would love to see more teachers doing, regardless of their philosophy, showing that their philosophy aligns with what they do in the classroom. Like you say, that ensuring that the other stakeholders, the pupils are on board, the parents understand what's expected, the teachers support this approach. It sounds like you've given a lot of thought to the philosophy and how that works in practice. That's exactly what I would love to see more educators doing. Thank you so much for that. Really, really interesting.
Okay. All right. So what has been shared earlier, Miss Nita already have, that's a shift background. And that's, I would say, what a leap of faith. Okay. All right. So, Miss Levy, shall we go to the breakout room session now?
Yeah, that's right. And before that, I would like to share the questions with everyone.
Okay.
So then everyone is aware of some prompt So these are just prompts, okay? Of course, you are definitely welcome to discuss anything else, but these are more like the prompt. Let me just share it again. Okay, so these are the questions. Yes. If you would like to screenshot it, if you like, or just to give you some reminder if you want. Yeah.
Okay, so here are the several topics that we will discuss in the breakout room. So feel free to screenshot it, or you want to take a picture. Later on, me and Leffy will join you guys in the breakout room, so we can have further discussion related to this point. Okay. Let me.
Okay, shall we start the breakout room?
Yeah, it would be
Okay.
nice.
All right then. So Rich will be in one of the breakout room, and as we always do, you will be transferred, Rich, to the other breakout room. So apologies if people is in the middle of a discussion with Rich, but you will be cut off. I'm sorry. Apologize. Just a heads up. Okay, breakout room. Sorry again, everyone, for cutting you off in the middle of your discussion. Apologies.
Okay. Okay, are we all here yet? Yeah, I think we are. Okay, I think now it's time to represent or to wrap up what we have shared in each representative room. So I would like to invite the room representative one first. Would you like to share some of your thoughts and discussion to what you have discussed in your breakout room, please? Anyone?
Which group one?
That's ours group.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Go ahead. That's
Okay,
right.
so I will share what we discussed. Is it important for the teacher to think about philosophy of education? Yes, indeed, it's very, very important. So we agree that a philosophy is like the way, the value that we have to hold in our mind, in our the way we teach the children, and then with this philosophy, we have to be responsible to the students what we teach them. So we also enrich the discussion how we can make sure like the university has what do you call it, encourage the students to learn about more philosophy in the university before they work in the school or university. And also, what is your personal philosophy? Because yes, me, Montessori, but in the group we talk about Ki Hajar Dewantara because this is like Indonesian founder in education, but in our discussion is still in line. So Strainer, Montessori, and Ki Hajar Dewantara, it is like a good philosophy, but the way implementation in the classroom may be quite different. But it's still the philosophy is still same. And then how do you apply your philosophy education? In in our discussion, we talk about in education, we have to see the children's need. What is the children interest? And then we can combine with the way we teach them in the classroom. And also there's a discussion about the government regulation about the education is still can be impacted to the way of the school. Like Indonesia, we have the 5 years changing the government, and sometimes the curriculum is quite little bit changing. But if we have the what do you call it, good philosophy, we can adapt without changing the way we can adapt with any kind of situation. Maybe our group one, if you want to share. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Wow, that's how we actually see important the the philosophy to become the compass, yeah, okay, of education. All right, thank you for your words, Nita. Okay, next I would like to uh Paulo, would you like to help
Yeah,
us with from the
so
okay, please.
right. So yeah, we also talked about the importance of teachers asking themselves questions about the way they're teaching, why they're teaching, whether I think we all agreed that that was extremely important to essentially monitor oneself, the both the practices and the reasons behind those practices. And I think we also discussed things similar to Nita's group. We also discussed this notion of taking the context in mind, the learners, and also the specific situation. So what is it that they need? What is it that they want? And sometimes this leads to making it difficult to pinpoint exactly where on the scheme of those that table that Richard showed us before with the four approaches. And he said, "Oh, myself, I'm somewhere in the middle, maybe." And sometimes it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly where you are, and sometimes maybe the your own belief does not necessarily match the way you actually teach, which is why I said something which I think other people found interesting, which was the fact that maybe the word philosophy is a little bit static, and Richard made the example of the fact that, and Arga also talked about the fact that you are asked to present your own philosophy in job applications. You would be asked, what is your teaching philosophy? And the answer might be bland, the answer might be generic, the answer might not reflect the reality. But I was like, I don't know if it's really my own impression, but philosophy felt very static to me, in the sense that, oh yeah, maybe I have some core beliefs that I'm really attached to, but I need to make decisions on a case by case basis, perhaps. But yeah, I think that was something that was stressed, this idea of adaptability uh, in general in practices and in the way it shapes the teaching practice from philosophy to practice. I'm sure I forgot something, but yeah, I think that was the main part of it.
Okay, thank you so much, Paulo. Okay, so oh, also Rich has shared something. Oh yeah, in the chat. Another useful term here is dissonance, where your philosophy practice and your philosophy differ. Yep. Okay. Does anyone have some more thoughts to share? Okay, it's been a wonderful ride having to know and also to be aware how philosophy shapes our reality in education, and also how we implement our uh, teaching practice in the class. We thought about our students, what they need, and the question is, do they actually need that, or do we need that for a better change? Yeah, that's the kind of question that always wraps around our head in everyday life as a teacher and also as a educator.